Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. Today I'm taking a look at every Konami game that's made its way onto the Genesis/Mega Drive. That includes games developed and published by Konami, games just published by them, and finally, original Konami games ported to Sega's 16-bit console by other companies. I'll cover any regional weirdness worth mentioning, like if Konami published a game in one region that was published in another region by somebody else. We'll be checking out a total of 18 games today. Alrighty, grab a snack or something, sit back and relax, and enjoy the show as I get on with it. We begin in pretty much the weirdest way possible with Junction. This was published by Micronet, but Konami's name and logo are present in various versions of the game. If you've never heard of a Konami game called Junction, well, there's a reason for that. There isn't one. Junction is essentially an updated isometric version of Konami's 1982 title Locomotion. It also bears some similarity to Konami's 1989 arcade title Kubrick. Locomotion involved a train marching forward along tracks that you manipulated pieces of like a slide puzzle. Anyway, in Junction, Micronet prettied up the graphics and gave the game an isometric view. In Junction, a ball replaces the train and it constantly rolls through the playfield, and you have to move the tiles around to create a path for it to clear out all of the U-shaped pipes on the outer edges of the playfield. If the ball can't move forward anymore, you die. If it touches an edge without a U-shaped pipe, you die. If it falls through a hole, yeah, you guessed it, you die. It's an okay puzzle game if you have the patience for it. As a side note, there's also a Game Gear version too, and it's top-down, looking more like the arcade original, but slightly glammed up. Is Junction worth playing today? It's worth a look, like I said, if you have the patience for it. It's not for everyone. Konami's first real foray into Genesis development was with an arcade port of Sunset Riders. And while the game is okay, they decided to go with a tiny, for the time, 4 megabit cartridge, which led to levels being cut, voice samples being removed, characters being cut, and just lower quality than you'd have normally expected from a Konami title at the time. Genesis Sunset Riders feels like Konami wasn't really sure about this whole Genesis system and wanted to dip their toes in the water and see how things were. And as you can see, next to the arcade version, it suffered quite a bit in its travels to the Genesis/Mega Drive, but it's still an okay experience in the end. It's worth playing if you've never tried it out, or if you just want to see how compromised the game had to be squeezed onto that tiny little cartridge. Thankfully, Konami's next title on the Genesis would be significantly better. The Super Nintendo got an excellent port of the second Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game, Turtles in Time. In fact, if you watch my comparison video from a while back, you'll see I said the home version of that game is better than the arcade version when it comes to a gameplay standpoint, and I completely stand by that. Konami seemingly took the engine and some of the graphics from TMNT 2 and brought them over to the Genesis, along with some stuff from the first arcade game and some original settings and things to create a mishmash of a game that plays just like the SNES Turtles in Time, but with mostly different levels and some different enemies and stuff. TMNT, the Hyperstone Heist, looks okay, plays great, and has fantastic music, especially for a release in 1993. But overall, it's just not quite up to the same level of quality as the SNES Turtles in Time, and it feels like it was constrained in some ways, especially with the limited number of bosses and the boss rush near the end. It's still really good and absolutely worth playing, even though it's really only the third best game using this engine, but that does not mean it's bad. It's still really good. Give it a try. Konami released Lethal Enforcers into the arcade back at a time when using quote-unquote realistic graphics was becoming all the rage. Instead of going with a fighting game like Pit Fighter or Mortal Kombat, Konami decided to go with a light gun title, and Lethal Enforcers was a pretty big hit for them. Now, while I like some light gun games, most of them are pretty repetitive and I tend to lose interest way before the end. It wasn't until we started getting polygonal light gun games that I really started to enjoy some of them a bit more. Lethal Enforcers was an okay arcade game, and it's an okay Genesis game, even though the graphics and sound are severely scaled down from that arcade original. Visually, I have to admit, it's kinda ugly, particularly with the insane dithering Konami employed to try to bring the more realistic digitized arcade graphics to the color-challenged Genesis/MD. But even so, for 1993, this was a decent enough way to play the game at home. And hey, I love you guys and girls for watching my videos, but please don't tell me you couldn't see the dithering on CRTs, because that just isn't true. I grew up playing this stuff on CRTs when it was all new, and unless your TV was really bad with a blurry picture, dithering was super obvious. Anyway, in the end, it is a repetitive shooter, but it's still kind of fun and worth checking out, even though there are better ways to play Lethal Enforcers these days. Here's Rocket Knight Adventures from 1993, and it's a damn shame that this game wasn't a much bigger hit because it's really good and it's probably Konami's first Genesis game to really show that magic touch they had on the NES and SNES. The graphics, sound, and gameplay are all great. Sparkster's jetpack allows for some unique gameplay mechanics, and there are plenty of inventive levels and gameplay elements to this one, like Sparkster sliding along rails upside down using his tail. There's even a shooter stage that is unfortunately the closest we ever got to an official Gradius game on the Genesis. The worst thing I can say about Rocket Knight Adventures is that it does have a little bit of a learning curve and it's not as instantly playable as some more mainstream hits like Contra or Castlevania, but it won't take too long to get used to it. If you've never got around to trying Rocket Knight Adventures, I strongly suggest giving it a chance. Just have a little bit of patience while you learn the controls and you'll probably grow to love this one. It's a great game. Every once in a while, a company seems to take a step forward and then 1 or 2 steps back. Konami's step back is known as the Genesis/MD version of TMNT Tournament Fighters. Now, the SNES Tournament Fighters was a bit of a generic Street Fighter II clone, but it was well made and it had really nice graphics and sound and very Street Fighter-tastic gameplay. While I wouldn't say it had lasting appeal, it was a fun knockoff for its time using popular characters, and the top-notch presentation made it a staple among fighting games for me and my friends who played it at least for a few months. The Genesis version is an entirely different game made by a different team and is nowhere near as good as the SNES game. On Genesis, Tournament Fighters looks bland. It doesn't have any line scrolling on the floors, the characters look less refined, the gameplay is considerably sloppier, and it'd be generous to even call this one mediocre. You only get 2 attack buttons in this game, and the Street Fighter II style moves aren't as smooth to execute as they are in the other 16-bit version of Tournament Fighters. I don't know why Konami didn't just go with the Genesis port of the Super Nintendo game. It might have looked or sounded not quite as good, but it would have been much better than this. Check it out if you're curious, but I have to say that in my opinion, this is the single most disappointing game that Konami released on the Genesis/Mega Drive. Tiny Toon Adventures Buster's Hidden Treasure is essentially Konami's take on a Sonic title with just a dash of Mario thrown in for good measure. It has the high production values that one would expect from Konami in their prime. It looks great and it sounds great. The control is pretty decent too, but just a tad lacking. It just doesn't feel quite as fluid as Sega's Sonic games on the Genesis. But if you have fond memories of watching Tiny Toon Adventures after school in the early 90s, then you'll appreciate the look of this game and seeing the characters dashing around all over the place. It's well made, has a Mario-style overhead map to access levels, and you only need to collect 50 doodads to gain an extra life instead of 100 doodads. In this case, the doodads being carrots for Buster. If you're a platforming action fan, you'll almost definitely like this one. It's pretty good overall. Is it as good as Mario or Sonic in general? No, but it's definitely second tier. Zombies Ate My Neighbors was developed by LucasArts and was published by Konami for the Genesis and SNES in 1993. Most gaming magazines of the time loved this mishmash of campy 1950s horror movies, Gauntlet, with maybe just a touch of Robotron thrown in. I'm sorry to say that I'm just not a fan of this game, and I've never much enjoyed it. I've always found it kind of dull and uninteresting. Unfortunately, the sound in the Genesis version here is also pretty grating. Now, if you're in the camp that loves Zombies Ate My Neighbors, hey, that's fine, go ahead, enjoy it. But as for me, this one is a hard pass. I've spent a lot of time over the years trying to see what other people saw in it, even back in the day, and I just can't. And that's coming from somebody, me, who has owned this game since it was new. Oh well. Okay, I'm including this game because Konami published it for the Mega Drive in Europe. Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing was developed by Gremlin Graphics, who made some of my favorite Amiga racing games, namely the Lotus series. Visually, there are some impressive elements here and there in World Championship Racing, but overall, this is one of those games that's just not as fun as it should be, and it doesn't hold a candle to those Lotus games I mentioned just a few precious seconds ago. The tracks are so thin that if 2 cars get in front of you and keep pace with each other, which happens a lot in this game, it can be next to impossible to overtake them because there's just no room, and even minor bumps with other cars slow you down significantly. This was another game that I wanted to love. It's got so much stuff in it. It's got tons of tracks, a lot of customization options, but unfortunately, the gameplay here just isn't as good as many of Gremlin's other racers. As a quick aside, this game was published in the US by GameTech. So is Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing worth playing? I mean, it's worth a look, but I can't imagine anyone will really stick around and truly enjoy this one. Okay, here is, in my opinion, Konami's best Genesis/Mega Drive game. It had a different name in every major region. In Japan, it was known as Vampire Killer. In the US, it was Castlevania Bloodlines. In Europe, it was Castlevania: The New Generation. Whatever you call it, it's my favorite all-action Castlevania title on any platform. You can select from 2 characters, John Morris, who's descended from the Belmonts and plays like a traditional Castlevania lead character, or Eric Lacard, who's also somehow related to the Belmonts but uses a spear. There are a few paths in the game that can only be tread by each individual character thanks to their unique special abilities, but each of them will see almost the entire game. There's only a few tiny minor points where things really diverge. Now, Bloodlines is a bit of an odd beast. Graphically, it's a mix of some really cool effects and sort of old school, sometimes flat out bland backgrounds. The main characters are smaller and less detailed than the Super Nintendo Castlevania titles, and they walk up stairs especially weird, with their feet on the very bottom pixel of each step, and they're also pushed a little too far forward as they walk up and down stairs. Now, Bloodlines does not look as good as either SNES Castlevania title, but when it comes to gameplay, I prefer it to both Castlevania 4 and Dracula X. Bloodlines was also the first Castlevania game with a soundtrack by Michiru Yamane, who composed the music in Symphony of the Night and several of the portable titles like Aria and Dawn of Sorrow. It also has some unique gameplay elements that I never see anyone talk about, like if you hold the attack button down, you can score a double hit on most enemies, making them much quicker and easier to take down. If you quickly just tap the attack button, you'll only get a single hit. Now, I've played this game way more than any other game on this list, and it's still great today despite being a bit visually rough around the edges. Now, I know most of you watching this have probably already played Bloodlines, but if you haven't, give this one a shot. It is a little bit on the hard side if you want to see the full ending since you have to play on maximum difficulty, but it's very doable and has the whole password thing going on. Check it out. Personally, I love this game. Konami stayed in the Warner Bros. Cartoon business with the release of Animaniacs for the Genesis in 1994. And I'll note here that the Animaniacs titles on the Genesis and SNES are completely different games. On the Genesis, we get 4 large levels that you can tackle in any order, followed by a 5th level. It's a side-scrolling action/puzzle platform game in which you control Yakko, Wacko, and Dot all at once, switching between them at will with the press of a button. Each has a unique ability. Yakko can attack things with his paddle ball, Wacko has a hammer that can smash objects and activate switches, Dot can blow kissy hearts that do various things. It can take a while to fully come to grips with the play mechanics on the Animaniacs, but I like that Konami tried something different with it, and it's mostly a pretty fun take on the property that looks and sounds good for the system. As long as you have a little patience, you'll probably like this one, but if you prefer your action fast in platformers, then Buster's Hidden Treasure will probably be more up your alley. A lot of people really love Contra Hardcore, and yes, that's how you pronounce this. It's not corpse, people. Jeez, I've actually had some people try to correct me about that in the comments. Anyway, I'm a huge Contra fan. The NES version of Contra is one of my favorite games of all time for any system. However, Contra Hardcore here, this would not be at the top of my list of even the best Contra games, unfortunately. First off, it's still a decent game, but Konami bogged this one down with a whole bunch of in-game story scenes, and I hate that in action games. If I'm playing a shooter or a run and gun, I don't want to sit and cycle through text for a story that I don't remotely care about. I want to press buttons and make things go boom. Konami also changed up the Contra gameplay and made it heavily focused on mini-boss encounters. There's not a whole lot going on in the levels themselves. They're mostly just there to usher you from one mini-boss encounter to the next, which is a pretty big departure from the earlier Contra games. I also would have preferred that Konami didn't do branching paths and that we just had straight levels in Contra and that those levels were more expertly designed than the ones we ended up with. And I've also got to say the music in Contra Hardcore was pretty disappointing and is, in my opinion, the worst Contra soundtrack up to the point that this game came out. It's full of bad distortion guitars and just general weirdness. It's hard to describe. Some of it's just kind of discordant. And you may say, oh, that's on purpose because it's all about aliens. It's not because of that. It's just because it's not well done. And I don't hate the game. If it sounds like I'm trashing it, I'm not. It's just not up to the standards of some earlier Contra games. And one thing I have to discuss about this one is the difficulty. Now, the gameplay itself, like I said, is alright, but they made the US version way harder than the Japanese original, taking out the life bar that players had in that one. Now, the life bar of the Japanese version maybe made things too easy. The US version, however, swings in the complete opposite direction and is way too hard. If you want to play Contra Hardcore today, I strongly suggest doing so with a hack that restores the life bar to the US version and makes some other quality of life changes. I've played through it several times, it just failed to reach the lofty heights of some of the games that preceded it, like Contra, Super Contra, and Contra 3. Feel free to yell at me for my valid opinion in the comments. Okay, NES Double Dribble was one of the all-time sports classics on that system. Almost everyone I knew at the time that game came out loved it, even if they didn't have much interest in playing or watching actual basketball. Many years later, Konami put out this Genesis exclusive sequel known as Double Dribble, the Playoff Edition, also known as Hyperdunk, and also known as Hyperdunk the Playoff Edition, depending on your region. Is it any good? Well, no, not really. It's fast, but it's kind of hard to control, and contemporary reviews were not kind to it. Now, contemporary reviews aren't always right, but this time, they were. At least it has big characters and kind of a neat pseudo 3D line scrolling effect on the floor. Besides some graphical impressiveness, beyond that, there's really just nothing here to recommend in this one. It's just not all that fun to play, and I say, feel free to skip it. You've seen it, you know it's a thing, don't waste your time on it. Lethal Enforcers 2 Gunfighters takes the franchise in a different direction from the original, straight back to the Old West. And you know what? I like this 1994 release a lot better than the original. It still kinda looks like hot garbage on the Genesis with extreme dithering, but the large characters are still kind of impressive, and some scenes like the stagecoach defense level and the boss that follows it look pretty cool considering the capabilities of the system. Even without the Justifier light gun, playing this game with just a control pad is still kind of fun, but it'll be murder on your thumbs, especially if you're as old as dirt like me. Now the gameplay is fine, if a bit simple. The sound and music are fine, but the dithering here is really distracting and can make it hard to tell what you're even supposed to be looking at sometimes. Overall though, for a 2D early 90s light gun game, Lethal Enforcers 2 is pretty good and worth checking out. But as I said with the first game, there are better ways to play it these days. Konami decided to go back to the Warner Brothers cartoon well one more time with Tiny Toon Adventures Acme Allstars. This one is a collection of mostly sports-themed minigames. You've got basketball, soccer, bowling, an obstacle course, and then also whack-a-mole. None of the games feel particularly great to play through, and they're all surprisingly simple. Now, Acme Allstars does also feature a story mode, but despite having loved Tiny Toons back in the day, I just couldn't sit through it. Little kids probably would have enjoyed button mashing their way through the obstacle course or soccer, and the production values are up to Konami's high standards when it comes to graphics and sound. But overall, this game just really isn't all that much fun. You might enjoy it for a few minutes, but it's probably not something you'll want to come back to after a single 15 to 30 minute play session. So is it worth checking out today? Maybe, but it's definitely not going to be on anybody's all-time favorite list. Konami followed up one of their early Genesis titles, Rocket Knight Adventures, with this sequel that was just simply called Sparkster in the West, but was named Sparkster Rocket Knight Adventures 2 in Japan. However, the Rocket Knight Adventures 2 subtitle still shows up in-game in Western releases, even though it's not in the packaging, at least as far as I remember. Now, the game is not as beloved as the original, but it's still a very good game. It looks great and has some really good and memorable music. Konami switched up some of the play mechanics in this one, namely the rocket pack charges automatically now, and it has its own button to execute rocket charges, which do a variety of things in this game. The gameplay is sometimes quite a bit more esoteric than it was in the first game. It can be tough to figure out what to do in spots, especially when it comes to overcoming certain challenges, which I imagine is why most reviewers of the day enjoyed it a little bit less than the first game. I should tell you that there's another game called Sparkster on the Super Nintendo. It's also a follow-up to Rocket Knight Adventures, but guess what? It's not the same game as this one. So should you give Genesis/Mega Drive Sparkster a try? Yeah, definitely. It's still a fun game, it's well made, and I have that first level music just stuck in my head as I write this review right now. Also, this was the last game that Konami developed for the Genesis. Okay folks, I'm not going to pretend to know what makes a good soccer game overall, as I'm not a huge fan of the sport. The only soccer game I've ever truly enjoyed was Worldwide Soccer on the Saturn. International Soccer Deluxe, released in 1996, is a bit of a weird one. Konami developed the game themselves for the Super Nintendo, but Factor 5, yeah, the guys who made the Turrican series, developed the Mega Drive version of the game, and this one only came out on the Mega Drive in Europe. It looks and sounds good, the gameplay feels decent enough, and it clearly has pretty high production values, but I'd be lying if I said that I enjoyed it very much. Despite that, I can appreciate that International Soccer Deluxe is a very well-made game, which is nice to see in a late title like this one, which came out at a time when quality was definitely waning on Genesis releases in general. And with this being a 1996 release, the Saturn was already out for a while at the point this game made its way to store shelves. So if you're a soccer fan, you might want to check it out. For the general gaming public, it's not going to win you over. The final Konami game that found its way onto the Genesis was this port of Frogger from Majesco in 1998. That's late in the system's lifetime, folks. How late? Frogger came out the same year that the Dreamcast was released in Japan. In fact, this was the final licensed US Genesis game to ever be released. How is it? It's a very arcade-accurate port of Konami's classic title. And you might think that Arcade Frogger is a Sega game since they distributed the arcade version in most major regions back in the day. But if you think that, well, you're wrong!
wrong!
I bet you thought that you wouldn't see the old captain this week, like I'd ever give him a day off. Anyway, the original Frogger was developed by Konami. This port by Majesco, while being pretty close to the arcade original, is also very bare bones. Without any real extras or options, it just has some fancy new cartoon graphics bolted on in places. So, I guess that's something. But is it good? Is it worth playing? Yeah, I mean, if you like arcade Frogger, you'll like this. It's very, very accurate and it's fun to play. It's simple. It's charmingly simple, some might say. And we know it's George Costanza's favorite. So that's gotta count for something, right? Okay, so there we are. A look at every Konami title that found its way onto the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. It's amazing that almost all of Konami's Genesis output pretty much came over a 2-year period from the end of 1992 through the end of 1994. The highlights are mostly what you'd expect: Castlevania, Contra, TMNT, the Hyperstone Heist, and Rocket Knight Adventures. Still, there's plenty of their other games that are worth looking at. It's a real shame Konami didn't get on the Mega Drive / Genesis a little bit earlier. I mean, the system was out for almost 4 years before they decided to start making games for it. But you have to remember, Nintendo had kind of a stranglehold on third-party licensees back at that time, with their restrictive NES licensing rules. Still, we definitely got a few hits from Konami in the time that they did spend developing Genesis games, and they also have a few standouts on Sega CD. But that's a story for another day. So what do you all think? What are your favorite Konami games on the Genesis / Mega Drive? What Konami games would you like to have seen that we never got? Gradius. Tell me all about it in the comments. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. Hit that hype button that's brand new on YouTube if it still exists at the point that you're watching this. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't ever miss any of my videos. If you want to support the work that I do here, you can do that on Patreon, on Ko-fi, or right here on YouTube through things like Super Thanks and channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.